Welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking about a really important topic for anyone who might be considering applying to stay in Canada permanently. It's about a specific way to apply for permanent residency, and we're going to look at all the details.
Yeah, a lot of people might find the usual ways of immigrating to Canada confusing, or they might not fit into those categories. So this is for people who might have special reasons to stay in Canada, but they don't meet the regular requirements.
So we're going to break down this whole process step by step to make it easy for you to understand.
Right, and we're going to be using the official guide from the Canadian government called Guide 5291 Humanitarian and Compassionate Considerations.
You can find that guide on the government website, canada.ca.
And there's a link to it in the description below so you can follow along.
So let's dive right in. What is this guide all about, and who is it for?
It's for people from other countries who are already living in Canada, but who might not be eligible to apply for permanent residency through the usual ways, like through express entry or family sponsorship.
So it's like a special pathway for people with unique situations.
Exactly. And it's for people who would face really difficult or even dangerous situations if they had to go back to their home country.
So it's not just about wanting to stay in Canada. It's about having really strong reasons why leaving would be a hardship.
That's right. So this guy explains who can apply for permanent residency on humanitarian and compassionate grounds, what they need to do to apply, and what the government considers when making a decision.
Sounds like there's a lot to cover. So who exactly can apply using this special process?
It's mainly for foreign nationals who are already in Canada. They have to be physically present in the country.
And they can't be Canadian citizens or permanent residents already, right?
Nope. It's not for people who already have a secure status in Canada.
And they can't already have a humanitarian and compassionate application in progress either, right?
That's correct. They can only have one application at a time.
What about refugee claimants? Can they apply this way too?
It's a little tricky. There are some rules about that. If someone has a refugee claim that's still being processed, they can't apply for permanent residency on humanitarian and compassionate grounds at the same time.
So they have to wait for a decision on their refugee claim first.
Exactly. There are also some rules about people who have had a refugee claim rejected.
Oh, right. Like they have to wait a certain amount of time before they can apply this way?
Yes. If their refugee claim was rejected less than 12 months ago, they usually can't apply yet.
There are some exceptions to that rule, though, right?
Yes. There are a few situations where someone might be able to apply even if it hasn't been 12 months since their refugee claim was rejected.
Like what?
Well, for example, if they have children who are Canadian citizens or permanent residents, they might be able to apply sooner.
That makes sense. The government would want to keep families together.
Exactly. And there are a few other exceptions, too. But the point is that there are a lot of details about who can and can't apply.
So it's really important to read the guide carefully to see if you're eligible.
Definitely. And remember, this is not a simple way to get around the normal immigration rules. It's only for people who have very strong reasons to stay in Canada and who don't qualify any other way.
It sounds like this is for people who are in really tough situations.
You could say that. It's definitely not the easy way out. It's for people who need special consideration.
So let's talk about what we mean by humanitarian compassionate grounds. What does that actually mean?
It means that someone is asking the Canadian government to make an exception for them. They're saying, look, I know I don't fit into the normal categories, but there are very strong reasons why I should be allowed to stay in Canada.
So it's like asking for special permission.
Yes, exactly. And to get that permission, they need to show that they would face serious problems if they were sent back to their home country.
So what kind of problems would the government consider serious enough to allow someone to stay?
Well, there are a lot of things they look at. They want to see that the person has really established a life in Canada, that they have strong ties to the country.
So that they're not just passing through. They've put down roots here.
Right. They've made a life for themselves in Canada. They might have a job. They might own a home. They might be involved in their community.
And if they were forced to leave, they'd be losing all of that.
Exactly. And the government also looks at things like the best interests of any children involved.
Yeah, that's really important. If someone has kids who are Canadian citizens or permanent residents, you wouldn't want to separate them from their parents.
Absolutely. And even if the children aren't Canadian citizens, the government still considers what's best for them. If they're settled in school, if they have friends here, if they're doing well in Canada.
It would be really disruptive to uproot them and make them start over somewhere else.
Exactly. And the government also considers things like the person's health. If they have a serious medical condition that can't be treated properly in their home country, That's a factor.
And of course, they look at the situation in the person's home country too.
Yeah, if there's a war going on or a natural disaster or if human rights are being violated, that would all be taken into consideration.
It wouldn't be safe or fair to send someone back to a place where their life would be in danger.
Right. So the government tries to take all these things into account when making a decision.
So applying on humanitarian and compassionate grounds is not a simple solution or a guarantee for permanent residency.
Definitely not. It's a complex process, and it's only for very specific and difficult situations.
It's more like a last resort for people who have exhausted all other options.
You could say that. It's for people who really need help and who are asking Canada to show compassion.
It's good to know that this option exists, though, for those who need it.
It is. It shows that Canada is a country that cares about people and tries to do the right thing, even in difficult situations. Now that we've talked about who can apply, let's zoom in on what the government actually looks at when they're deciding on these cases. What factors they weigh.
Yeah, because it's one thing to say you have a reason to stay, but it's another to prove it to the government.
Right. So one of the biggest things they consider is how settled someone is in Canada.
So basically how much they've built a life here.
Exactly. They're looking at how long you've lived in Canada, what kind of work you do, if you're involved in your community, all those things that show you're not just passing through.
So they want to see that Canada is truly your home now.
Right. And they want to see stability, too. Like, do you have a steady job? Have you been living in the same place for a while? Are you contributing to Canadian society?
So it's not just about how long you've been here, but also how deep your roots are.
Exactly. It's about showing that you're integrated into life here.
And what about ties to Canada? Is that different from being settled?
It's kind of related, but ties are more about specific connections you have here, like family, friends, work, those kinds of things.
So having family members who are Canadian citizens or permanent residents would be a strong tie.
Definitely. That's a big one. And close friendships that have developed over time, those count too.
What about ties through work?
Things like owning a business or having a stable job that shows you're contributing to the economy. Those can be strong ties too.
So it's about showing that you have a stake in Canada, that you have something to lose if you have to leave.
Right. And that you're likely to stay here and continue contributing.
I know the guide emphasizes the best interests of the child as being really important.
Yes, that's a huge factor. When there are children involved, the government always considers what's best for them.
So it's not just about the parent situation, but also the kid's well-being.
Exactly. It's about making sure the children aren't being harmed or uprooted unnecessarily.
So if the kids are thriving in Canada, going to school, making friends, that would be a strong argument for the family to stay.
Definitely. And the government looks at the impact on the child, whether they're Canadian citizens or not.
So it's really about protecting children in this process.
It is. And it shows how much Canada values children and their well-being.
Besides those factors, are there other things they look at?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They consider the applicant's health, too. Like if they have a serious medical condition that can't be treated in their home country, that would be a big factor.
So it's not just about your own well-being, but also whether you can get the care you need.
Right. They want to make sure people can access the health care they need.
And they also look at family violence, right?
Yes. If someone is fleeing abuse or has a well-founded fear of persecution if they return to their home country, that's a very serious consideration.
So it's about protecting vulnerable people.
Exactly. And making sure they're safe.
Now, the guide also talks about the consequences of separation from family members.
Right. That's about situations where forcing someone to leave Canada would cause serious hardship for their family members who are Canadian citizens or permanent residents.
Like if someone is the primary caregiver for a child with a disability or an elderly parent.
Exactly. Separating them would have a huge impact on the family.
So they try to avoid that kind of disruption.
They do.
Yeah.
They recognize that families should be kept together whenever possible.
And I know they also look at what's happening in the applicant's home country.
Yeah, they consider the overall situation there. Like, is there a war going on? Are there human rights violations? Are there natural disasters that would make it unsafe to return?
So it's about making sure people aren't sent back to dangerous situations.
Exactly. Canada has a responsibility to protect people from harm.
So all these factors together paint a picture of the person's life and their reasons for needing to stay in Canada.
That's the goal. They want to get a complete understanding of the situation so they can make a fair decision.
So it's important to give them all the information that's relevant to your case.
Absolutely. The more information they have, the better equipped they are to make the right decision.
Now, I know there's something called inadmissibility that can affect whether someone is allowed to stay in Canada. Can you explain what that is?
Sure, inadmissibility basically means there's something in your past or in your current circumstances that makes you ineligible to enter or stay in Canada.
So like having a criminal record.
No, that's a common one. And it doesn't even have to be a serious crime. Sometimes even minor offenses can make you inadmissible.
Wow. So people really need to be aware of that.
They do. And it's not just criminal history. They also look at health reasons.
So if you have a serious contagious disease, you might be inadmissible.
Right. If your health poses a risk to public health or safety, that could be a problem.
What about financial reasons?
That's another one. If you don't have enough money to support yourself and your family in Canada, you could be found inadmissible.
So it's not just about getting here. It's about being able to live here without becoming a burden on the system.
Exactly. They want to make sure you can support yourself financially.
And what about giving false information?
Oh, that's a big one. If you lie on your application or try to hide something, that's a serious offense.
So it's really important to be honest and truthful throughout the whole process.
Absolutely. Honesty is the best policy when it comes to immigration.
So if someone knows they might be inadmissible, is there anything they can do?
The best advice is to try to resolve those issues before you apply.
So like if you have a criminal record, you could try to get a pardon.
Exactly. Or if you have a health issue, you could get a medical assessment to show you're not a risk to public health.
It's better to address those things up front than to wait and hope they don't notice.
Absolutely. It shows you're taking responsibility and being proactive.
Now, I know that even if you are inadmissible, there's still a possibility of getting approved on humanitarian and compassionate grounds, right?
That's true, but it's a long shot. It's really only in exceptional circumstances where there are incredibly strong humanitarian reasons to let someone stay.
So it's not something you should count on.
Definitely not. It's more like a last resort if all else fails.
But it's good to know that the option exists.
It is. It shows that Canada is willing to consider all the circumstances and make exceptions when it's truly justified. Now let's dig into the documents you need to gather when you're applying for permanent residency on humanitarian and compassionate grounds.
Yeah, because it's not enough to just say you have reasons to stay. You have to prove it.
Exactly. You need evidence to back up your claims, and that's where the documents come in.
So what kind of documents are we talking about here?
Well, it varies depending on your individual situation. But there are some common ones that almost everyone needs, like police certificates, medical exams, financial documents, letters of support, and reports about the conditions in your home country.
Okay, let's break those down one by one. Starting with police certificates, why are they so important?
They're basically a background check. They show the government that you're a law-abiding citizen and that you don't have any criminal history that would make you inadmissible to Canada.
It's about safety and security.
Right. They want to make sure that people coming to Canada aren't a danger to others.
And do you need a police certificate from every country you've lived in?
Pretty much, yeah. If you've lived in a country for 6 months or more since you turned 18, you need a police certificate from there.
Wow. So that could be a lot of paperwork for some people.
It can be, but it's important. It's all part of making sure that Canada is a safe and welcoming place for everyone.
What about medical exams? Why are those required?
Medical exams are there to ensure that you don't have any health conditions that would pose a risk to public health in Canada.
So things like contagious diseases.
Yes. And also serious conditions that might put a strain on the healthcare system.
So it's about protecting everyone's health.
Exactly. And everyone who applies needs to have a medical exam regardless of their age or where they're from.
Now, you mentioned financial documents earlier. What are some examples of those?
Financial documents are all about proving that you can support yourself financially in Canada, that you're not going to be a burden on the system.
So things like bank statements, pay stubs, tax returns.
Yep. All those things can help show that you have the means to live in Canada without needing government assistance.
And the amount you need to show probably varies depending on your family size and where you're planning to live, right?
That's right. It's always best to check the specific requirements for your situation.
Okay. Now, what about letters of support? What role do they play?
Letters of support are basically character references. They're letters from people who know you well and can vouch for your good character or explain any hardships you're facing.
So these could be from friends, family members, employers, community leaders.
Exactly. Anyone who can provide insight into your situation and speak to your positive qualities.
It sounds like these letters can really help personalize the application and give the government a better sense of who you are as a person.
That's the idea. They add a human touch to all the official documents and help the government see you as an individual.
Now, you also mentioned reports about the conditions in the applicant's home country. What are those called and why are they important?
Those are called country condition reports,
Hmm.
and they provide information about the overall situation in the applicant's home country.
So things like political instability, armed conflict, human rights violations.
Exactly. They paint a picture of what it's like to live in that country and whether it's safe for someone to return there.
And the government uses those reports to assess the risk if someone were to be sent back.
Right. They want to make sure they're not sending people back to dangerous or unstable situations.
So it's all about protecting people.
Exactly. And it reflects Canada's commitment to human rights and compassion.
I know that getting all these documents together can be a lot of work.
It can be, especially if you're not sure where to start or if you don't have a lot of support.
Do you have any advice for people who might be feeling overwhelmed by the process?
My biggest piece of advice is to reach out to a qualified immigration professional. They can help you understand what documents you need, guide you through the process, and make sure everything is done correctly.
So having a professional on your side can make a big difference.
It really can. They know the ins and outs of the system, and they can advocate for you.
Now, are there any other general tips you'd give to someone applying for permanent residency on humanitarian and compassionate grounds?
Definitely.
Hmm.
One important thing is to start early. Don't wait until the last minute to gather your documents, because some of them, like police certificates, can take time.
So be proactive and get a head start.
Exactly. And another thing is to be organized. Keep all your documents together in a safe place. Make copies of everything and keep the originals for yourself.
That's good advice. It's easy to lose track of things when you're dealing with so much paperwork.
And lastly, be patient. This process can take time, sometimes months or even years, so try to stay positive and don't lose hope.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. And remember, even if your application is refused, it's not necessarily the end of the road. There might be other options to explore.
So it's important to stay informed and keep fighting for what you want.
Absolutely. Never give up on your dreams.
We've covered a lot of ground in this episode, and I think our listeners have a much better understanding of how to apply for permanent residency on humanitarian and compassionate grounds.
It's a complex process, but hopefully we've demystified it a bit.
And remember, if you're thinking about applying, it's always best to consult with a qualified immigration professional.
They can provide personalized advice and help you navigate the system successfully.
For those who want to learn more about this process or other immigration options in Canada, we encourage you to visit the official Canadian government website.
You can find a link to the guide we've been discussing in the description below, along with other helpful resources.
And as always, we want to thank you for listening and for joining us on this journey of exploring Canada.
We hope you found this episode informative and helpful.
If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to our show and leaving us a comment. We love hearing from our listeners.
And don't forget to check out the links in the description for more information.
Until next time, have a great day.